In this video, let's talk about clean mastering. I'm going to get very nitpicky about certain parts of mastering and processing. Now know that you don't have to follow what I'm saying to get a clean sounding master, but at the very least, the info here is going to be some food for thought during your next session. Now real quick, I just finished the Sage Audio School of Mastering. It's a 21 video curriculum, and it's just under 4 hours of highly detailed and in-depth mastering lessons. So that's why I haven't been posting to YouTube as often. I'm sorry about that. But I'll cover that in more detail at the end of the video, so stick around if you're interested. Let's start with what to avoid in a clean master. So if you want a master to sound clean, odds are you're going to want to avoid a few things. First, you'll want to avoid plugins that introduce a significant amount of latency. Sometimes it's hard to see if a plugin that you're using introduces latency, but at least in Logic Pro X, you can hover over the insert and the text box is going to pop up showing how many samples of latency is caused by the plugin. The greater the latency, the more likely your signal is going to encounter pre-ringing, a subtle form of distortion in which latency compensation causes mild attenuation to transients, especially in the low frequency range. With that in mind, you'll want to master your session at a higher sampling rate. Since plugins will delay by a set number of samples, if you increase the sampling rate of your session, you'll reduce the amount of time that each sample takes up, in turn reducing the latency time and subsequent pre-ringing distortion. The latency of each plugin makes a very small change to the sound, but as you can imagine, this adds up with more plugins that you add. Now this brings me to the next point, which is you'll want to avoid using too many processors. In addition to latency, plugins can add small artifacts to the signal. Again, this effect is subtle and will vary from plugin to plugin, since some are designed better than others, but the more that you add, the more likely you are to encounter unwanted artifacts. If you need to use a lot of plugins in your chain, listen carefully to ensure that they don't negatively impact the quality of the signal. Next, you'll want to avoid introducing moderate to significant saturation. Although the harmonics introduced from saturation sound great in most cases, they'll reduce the dynamic range by adding low-level content to the signal. Again, this isn't a bad thing in most masters, but retaining the dynamic range is important when you're trying to achieve a clean sound. So let's leave the dynamic range unaffected as much as possible. Similarly, exciters should be avoided. Although they can brighten up the sound, making it sound cleaner, they'll likely create aliasing distortion by distorting high frequencies. If you use either an exciter or high-frequency saturator, you could attenuate aliasing with some oversampling, but this increases the plugin's latency, in turn causing subtle pre-ringing distortion. Now the last thing that you want to avoid when you're making a clean master is parallel processing. This includes parallel compression, parallel maximization, and any other form of processing that splits the signal. This idea is true for both auxiliary sends within the DAW and wet-dry signals within the plugin. In other words, don't use sends, and if you're using a plugin with a wet-dry or mixed dial, ensure that the effect is set to 100%. When a signal is split and processed differently from the original, phase cancellation is going to occur when the two signals are combined. The severity of this cancellation depends on the plugin used. For example, parallel EQ causes the most noticeable cancellation, but all forms of parallel processing will negatively affect the signal in this way. With these ideas in mind, let's create a clean mastering chain, starting the chain with EQ. To start the chain, I'm going to use this Weiss EQ1. It's an incredibly clean sounding EQ, but what I like about it is that it forces me to only make a handful of changes. Now, if you want a free alternative, I'd recommend this M Equalizer by Melda Audio. Just be sure to avoid the saturation dial in the top window. Now you'll notice that if I keep the plugin on low latency mode, it doesn't introduce any latency whatsoever. I'm going to keep the processing as stereo and avoid affecting the left and right channels separately. Again, I'm trying to keep things as simple as possible for this master. Now with the EQ, I'll boost the lows, dip a little around 250 Hz to reduce high frequency masking, boost some of the vocals' clarifying frequencies, and then add some air with a high shelf. Although some of these filters look aggressive, notice that the biggest change that I'm making is to the lows, and it's still under 2 dB of change. Now what you change is going to depend on what you're trying to achieve, but just be sure to avoid super narrow or aggressive changes that'll sound unnatural, and depending on the EQ may even introduce artifacts. So let's take a listen to this EQ being enabled and notice how the track sounds clean, but with certain ranges augmented. With the next insert, we're introducing clean maximization. Although we want to preserve our dynamic range as much as possible, maximization, when used correctly, can increase the perceived depth and dynamic range of a master. So this is how that works. In short, maximization increases the quietest parts of the signal. Now, some of these parts were so quiet that they were masked by louder sounds and/or fell below our threshold for hearing. This usually happens to high-frequency details, as well as the very tail end of reverb. By bringing these parts up, we're reducing the dynamic range, but we're giving the listeners something that they could actually hear during the quieter parts. With that in mind, I'm going to use this Weiss MM1 maximizer and stick to the default setting, but switch it over to the loud algorithm. Now notice that I'm getting no peak down attenuation from the ceiling. Instead, I'm only using the maximization side. Additionally, notice that the wet dry is set to 100%. This is going to reduce phase cancellation and keep the signal sounding clean. Now, if you don't have this plugin, you could try OTT by X4 Records, but use very subtle settings to avoid hyping up the sound too much. I'd avoid using something like the Sonics Inflator, since it's going to add a lot of harmonic content, in turn changing the timbre. With that in mind, I thought this MM1 was the best option, even if it does introduce some latency. So let's take a listen to the plugin being introduced, and we'll switch between algorithms to hear how each one impacts the sound. Next up, we're trying this P440 equalization. Now this is a new EQ that I came across, and I think it works really well for mastering. I'm inserting it after the MM1 to adjust the balance of our now maximized signal. I'll keep everything pretty simple and subtly amplify 120 Hz around the snare's fundamental and kick's second order harmonic by about 1 dB. Then I'm going to very subtly amplify 6 kHz to brighten up the sound, and the same could be said for a little under 10 kHz. The filters that this plugin introduces are very subtle and broad, similar to a Pultec, but with distinctive curves and Q values. Now, the main reason I like this plugin is what it could do to the low frequencies. I'm going to introduce this tremor function, use the dial to set the frequency cutoff, and then use the gain slider to subtly amplify the filter. Now, strangely enough, this function introduces the Schumann frequency and multiples or harmonics of it. The Schumann frequency is about 7.83 Hz, so below our perception of hearing, and it's the same frequency as the Earth's natural resonance. Now, whether or not these frequencies have a big impact on humans is still being researched, but for some reason, I really enjoy the sound of these harmonics being added to the lows. Another reason I picked this particular plugin is due to its zero latency, which, as we've covered, is ideal when creating a clean-sounding master. So let's take a listen to this EQ being introduced, and then I'll adjust the tremor function to a more aggressive level so that you could hear how it affects the lows. Next up, we're introducing soft knee clipping. Although clipping isn't thought of as a clean form of processing, when compared to the timbre-altering effects of compression and saturation, it's actually a lot cleaner sounding than one might think. I'll use this newfangled Saturate Clipper, but if you want a free version that's pretty similar, I'd recommend this free clip plugin by Vent Audio. With the drive slider, I'll increase the incoming signal until I start to see some attenuation. I'm noticing that 3 dB is a good starting point, with the signal occasionally hitting the ceiling. Now, you might think that a hard knee setting is best, since it only attenuates transients and adds to the distortion associated with clipping less often. However, after listening closely, I'm noticing that slightly softer settings are squeezing the signal nicely, as well as introducing less noticeable distortion. Now, I think that this detail preservation effect is actually lessening the effect of the distortion, but nevertheless, I'm really enjoying the sound of these settings. Now, what's great about this plugin, or clippers in general, is that they let me push the signal to the ceiling while adding very transparent attenuation, especially if I keep the attenuation around 1 dB. Lastly, the plugin itself introduces some latency, but it's nothing too significant. So let's take a listen to the plugin being introduced, and notice how it sounds fuller, louder of course, and how the attenuation is pretty transparent. Then we can adjust the knee settings and the detail preservation slider so that you can hear how these elements are altering the sound. Next, we have our final limiting stage. So last up for the chain, let's add a limiter to get the LUFS to a competitive level, while ideally retaining the original timbre. I'm going to use this FabFilter Pro L2, but a great free alternative is Limiter 1 by SysDSP Factory, or you could use Limiter number 6 by Tokyo Don Labs, which introduces a lot more features, a clipper, and more. Back to the Pro L2, I'm going to turn off look ahead, avoid oversampling, and set a longer attack with a shorter release around 50 milliseconds. Now you might be wondering how I could use these settings and still avoid intersample peaking. In short, all I need to do is turn down the output. Granted, I need to keep an eye on my true peak meter, but I'm noticing that after lowering the output to -0.5 dB, my true peak level is staying around that value. I found that the transient algorithm has the lowest latency and the cleanest sound unless it's being pushed super hard. Now, since we increased the level with the clipper before this plugin, I don't need to use this limiter too aggressively, so this algorithm is going to work well. Alternatively, Punch is another great low latency option. I avoided look ahead since it's going to affect my ADSR of the transients. The same could be said about true peak limiting, so I'm going to avoid this as well. A release time of 50 milliseconds is the quickest that I can set before I start to cut into and distort the signal's low frequencies. By using a quick setting, I could return the signal to unity quickly, which retains the dynamic range a little bit better than long release settings. Now, if we look at our metering, we'll notice that our true peak level is still good and that the LUFS is roughly -11. Now, keep in mind that this plugin's LUFS measurement is relative to -9 LUFS, so 2 below -9 LUFS is -11 LUFS. I'm just saying that because that's definitely not something that's clear at first glance. Admittedly, the master isn't the loudest, but it has a clean and upfront sound that still retains its depth and dynamics. We're going to do a quick recap and A/B of the full chain in a moment, but first, let's take a listen to the track with this limiter being enabled and notice how it sounds cleanly amplified with only a small difference in its tone or timbre. Last up, we got a full chain overview. But before we do a full A/B of the original signal in our chain, let's just look at some key points. Now first, we only used 5 plugins or inserts, no sends, and all effects were set to 100% whenever a parallel or blend function was available. Almost all plugins were either low latency or no latency, and the session was set to a 192 kHz sampling rate to keep the time delay per sample as low as possible, which helped minimize the effect of pre-ringing. Now, only subtle changes were made with the EQs, and we only introduced non-harmonic generating plugins, so no tape emulations or saturators, aside from the soft knee clipper. Lastly, the limiting that we used did not introduce oversampling, look ahead, or true peak limiting, and instead utilized a lower output to avoid intersample peaking. Like I said at the beginning of this video, I was going to be really nitpicky about what type of processing I'm introducing, but I think that the final result sounds incredibly clean. Let me know if you're hearing the same thing in the comments section, or if this chain kind of misses the mark for you. Either way, I'm happy to hear your thoughts. So let's take a listen to the full A/B. I'm going to use peak normalization so that the comparison is a bit closer. So, a lot has changed recently. We have a completely new website with a lot of great features, so let's take a quick look. To sign up, all you need to do is click Join Now on our website and enter in your info. Here's what it's going to look like once you've created an account. Now, first thing you'll notice is that by signing up, you get not a free mastered sample, but a completely free full master of your mix. After that, you continue to get 50% off of all of our mastering services as long as you're a member. Using the browser on the left side under Sage Audio Engineering School, you could take a look at our brand new School of Mastering with all 21 videos in order and the ability to track your progress as you go. We're adding to our engineering school over the next year, and you'll get a 50% discount for all new curriculum if you're a member. Now, when you sign up for the School of Mastering, you'll have access to our mentorship campus, where all members can ask questions about the lessons, get feedback on their mixes and masters, and share ideas. Also, we're always going to respond to you and help you with any questions that you might have. Lastly, you get access to a bunch of great free perks, including over 50 mixing and mastering chains, 40 plus mixes with which you could practice your mastering, 20 high-quality multi-track sessions to use for mixing practice, and all of the custom plugin presets that we've used in previous YouTube videos. If you have any additional questions about the membership or the Sage Audio Engineering School, let me know in the comments and I'll get back to you soon. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you in the next video.